Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers. We are back on one of my favourite systems, the Commodore 64, which I would say is a rather super system. So, in light of that, we're going to take a look at some of the games available for it that star your favourite superheroes. Now, how about I shut the hell up, you press that subscribe button, and we take a look at some games. First up is Batman, the Caped Crusader from everyone's favourite licensed game maker, Ocean. This is a strange ass game that has a lot going for it, but just as much not going for it. It's an action adventure with more emphasis on the adventure. You are of course Batman, and you can choose from one of two scenarios, either taking out the Joker or Penguin. No matter which one you choose, you start out in the Batcave where you need to explore and get all the equipment that you'll need for your mission. Then you head to the streets where, as far as I can tell, you wander around aimlessly fighting enemies that never die, and generally you just get lost. You see, the game also has a lot of puzzle elements and you'll need specific items to use in specific places, and actually it does kind of make sense. What's cool here is that the whole game plays out in a comic book style panel, which does look great and doesn't get as confusing as you might think. The music is also fantastic and has a real Batman feel to it. The graphics are decent too, with a lot of colour. The main issue here though is the controls, which kind of suck. Mainly as you only have one attack button on the joystick, and that's used for everything. You can attack by holding the button down and pressing a direction except down. Pressing down on the button brings up your inventory and options where you can select what items you need. A nice touch here is that it's laid out like a comic, so you'll get hints written in the corners of the panels where you would normally get a bit of story in real comics. This is a cool way of giving hints. This is a game that I've actually had since first getting the C64, and I still don't know how I feel about it. I can never really get anywhere in the game, but for some reason I always go back and keep trying every time I fire up the system. I would say give it a go if you're a fan, but be warned, it's not an easy, simple, or even particularly action-packed game. Batman the Movie now, also from Ocean. This is based on the 1989 Tim Burton movie, and I'm assuming it follows the plot of the movie, but I'll be honest, I couldn't get past the first level, even with cheats. You of course play as Batman, and the game looks decent, starting you out in the chemical plant where you have to explore a huge maze-like level, taking out enemies with your batarangs, which you have an infinite supply of. You can also use your bat grappling hook to climb and swing to other sections. The problem for me though is that I just never knew where the hell I was meant to go, with no indication, a short time limit, and the biggest issue is that you take fall damage. Often you don't know what's going to be a small drop or a large drop, so I just end up dying loads and wandering around aimlessly. This is a common theme for Ocean games I've found, poor level design and cheap difficulty to compensate for games that are only 4 or 5 levels long. It's a shame as this game looks really good and it doesn't play too bad, though the collision detection is a bit crappy, but this could have been a great game. I'm almost tempted to say that it's not bad and I just suck, but I really didn't have fun in the time I was playing it, and I couldn't even get past the first level, but if it looks like something that you might enjoy, then give it a go. After all, Batman is in it. Next up is the amazing Spider-Man and Captain America in Doctor Doom's Revenge. Guess what the story is here? Yeah, you got it. This is a really cool action game where you take it in turns playing as Captain America and Spider-Man. You get some really great comic book style cutscenes between each level that tell you the story and introduce the character that you're about to fight. I couldn't believe how well this was done, and it was all really good. Then you're put in a one-on-one fight against said enemy in a fight to the death. Both characters control the same, and it's the usual hold down the button and press a different direction for different move thing. It works very well, and you can punch, kick, jump, and either throw your shield or shoot your web depending on who you are. The only thing I had trouble with was just turning around, and I never was really sure how I actually ended up doing it. I think it has something to do with diagonals, but I'm still not entirely sure. Despite this, I was still able to win every fight I was in. In fact, I found that if you just do the crouch attack, then you basically just win every fight anyway. What's cool is that you meet a great collection of smaller villains here, from Machete to that fencer bloke that turned up in the recent She-Hulk series. It was nice to see these lesser known characters get a bit of love. I was really surprised with how good this one was. The graphics are excellent, even if Spider-Man does look a bit goofy, and the animation is very choppy, but the game is very playable, and I really had a great time playing it. This one is highly recommended. We'll stick with Spider-Man for a minute with The Amazing Spider-Man. This is a side-scrolling action game where you play as Spider-Man, who of course has to fight all sorts of baddies and swing around a bunch of levels exploring and generally being a good old-fashioned friendly neighbourhood something or other. Now, the graphics here are pretty good and the animation is all excellent, apart from the fact that Spidey himself looks a bit more like Spooderman than Spider-Man, strutting around like someone's just told him he's not allowed the food on the menu he's just ordered, and he's storming up to the counter to complain. And when he crawls, whether it's on walls or on the ground, he kind of looks like when a dog wipes its arse on the grass. Other than that though, the game looks really good. It's all played on a single screen, and you just have to navigate a lot of them, often attempting to fight or avoid enemies that are basically all just R2-D2 for some reason, but the platforming is possible once you get used to it. What's impressive for such an early Spidey game is that you can crawl on pretty much everything, and you can use your webs to swing around as much as you like. However, the controls are pretty twitchy, and it is hard to be accurate, and it takes a hell of a lot of practice to get any good. There were a lot of times where I thought I'd be climbing on walls, but just ended up falling to my death, and it can be frustrating when you fall off a screen that has taken you 10 minutes to get to just because you missed a swing. This is definitely one of those where the hell do I go games as well, that I'm sure you can beat in about 20 minutes when you know what you're doing, and although it did look good and play relatively okay, I just couldn't seem to get into this one. The droning music didn't help matters much either. You know what, you might like this if you have the patience of a saint, but I'm afraid it wasn't really for me. Next up is everyone's favourite Marvel mallard, Howard the Duck. Now, this is actually an interesting one. It's a top-down adventure game where you, as Howard, have to rescue his human mates. To do this, you explore a volcanic island inhabited by evil bastards. Along the way, you'll find items to help you get further, like jetpacks, which is fun. You can move just about anywhere, and you can jump. The jumping is kind of strange, as you do have a small hop, but if you're near a specific thing that you need to jump over, then you automatically jump as far as you need to when you hit the jump button, which I guess is kind of handy. Though this can take a while to figure out, as you have to be standing in the exact right place to make it across the jump. But keep trying and you'll eventually make it. The island is also packed with enemies that need a beaking. Luckily, Howard is a tough cookie and is armed with some pretty powerful kicks that deal with most enemies fairly quickly. The game has some slight puzzle elements to it where you'll need to find certain items and solve mazes to progress, but none of these are too taxing, and they're all actually pretty fun to play through, and I was surprised at how much I enjoyed playing this game as a whole. The graphics are pretty good, which really helped, with some good animation and colour, and there's a decent sense of humour to the game as well. Unfortunately for me, the game would keep crashing whenever it had to change screens, so I could never get too far into it, but I would still say this is well worth a look. It's a great little adventure game that is a hell of a lot better than I ever thought it would be. Right, if you need to go get a drink or take a toilet break, now is the time, while I briefly talk about the Questprobe games. There's 3 of them in total on the C64, and they're those text adventures where you have to type in very specific and stupidly cryptic commands to get anywhere. The first one is about the Incredible Hulk, and there's some nonsense about having to find crystals to stop evil stuff from happening. Now, to be fair, the graphics here are actually quite good with some cool images, though it's just a text adventure and there's no animation, so it's all just stills. Sadly, the game itself is just so cryptic with the commands you need. I had to look up a guide to get past the first screen. Have a guess at what you have to type in order to change into the Hulk and escape from the first bit. Go on, have a guess. What do you think? Well, you're wrong. You have to type bite lip, and then that makes you bite your lip that it hurts enough so you transform into the Hulk. Then in another screen there's a giant dome, and it turns out to find the crystal, you have to turn into the Hulk and then just lift up the dome where it's hidden underneath. And then you have to dig a damn hole. It's ridiculous, and there's no way you'd know to do half of this stuff. Now, maybe veterans of these types of games will actually say it's simple and obvious, but I really am not a fan of these type of games. They're slow, dull, and to me, they make no sense. There's no music or sound either, which really doesn't help. The second one in the series is a Spider-Man themed game, and after exploring a hallway and meeting Madam Web, the game went all glitchy and crashed on me, but to be honest, I was kinda glad. And the third one is a story about the Fantastic Four, but this one didn't even bother loading. Good. If you like these sorts of games, then knock yourself out with these, but if you're anything like me, I'd say stay far away. Interestingly, Superman got 4 games that I know of on the C64, so let's look at them. The first one is called Superman the Game, and it's a really good looking game, but I honestly have no idea what the hell you're meant to be doing. It reminds me of like a cross between Ghostbusters and Pac-Man. You are in what I'm assuming is Metropolis, and there's a gem looking thing that appears on the map every now and then. Here you have to race Darkseid to get the gems and you build up a score. You can zap the blue bastard with your eye lasers at times, and likewise he can shoot you to stun you as well. There are some white lines on the map that sometimes turn when you touch them, but I have no idea why or how it ever happened. Eventually you're sent to a shooter style game where there's a robot thing shooting bubbles, so you have to eye laser it a few times and eventually you're sent back to the previous screen to repeat the process. Now, this isn't a terrible game, in fact I actually found it quite addictive, even though I never actually knew what the hell I was meant to be doing. This is one of those games that I think I'll actually look up the manual for it to find out what I'm supposed to be doing, as I think it could be a bit of fun. The next one is called Superman 2. Well, actually, according to the title screen, it's called 2 Superman, but let's not worry about that. This is just a straight up side-scrolling shooter where you fly around shooting everything you see with your eye lasers. There's a ton of enemies that have the usual patterns that you see in these games, as well as bosses, which are basically clusters of enemies. You also have a load of things to avoid on the levels, like indestructible blocks. These are your biggest enemies for the most part, as Superman moves really slowly and can only shoot one eye laser at a time. This actually makes him kinda useless. The blocks you have to avoid are often placed very close together, and because you're so slow, it's hard to avoid them. Same with the enemies. Of course, if you take just one hit, then you die, and you're sent back a fair way. You only get 3 lives, and then of course it's back to the start. It's the crazy difficulty that ruins this one, as it actually plays okay, but the slow speed and limited shots make it really hard to get even past the first level. This is fun for a couple of minutes, but soon it becomes a chore to play. I'd say don't bother with it. The next one is just called Superman, and it's another shooter that basically plays the same, but is a little easier. This time you're in Metropolis, and there's a load of enemies coming at you, including evil Supermen, so maybe this is based on Superman 3, or was it 4? I can never remember. There's also a weird car thing that's always on the screen, shooting crap that you can't destroy, but if it or anything else touches you, you plummet to your death, because Superman's a wimp. There's also tiny citizens that you can rescue, which is nice. This is definitely a better game than the other shooter Superman game, but it's still not particularly great. It looks super basic, and I've got a feeling that it's probably not an officially licensed game or anything like that. It's fine, but another one that you just might as well ignore. The last Superman game that I have is Superman Man of Steel, and this one is by far my favourite, and actually it's the one I had growing up, but that's not the reason why, it's genuinely really good. The game starts with an awesome version of the Superman theme song which sounds great, and some excellent intro graphics. Then you have a few different gameplay styles, all of which involve flying around and shooting or punching things. Every level has a comic book style intro to the scene, and then you're sent into the action, where you'll be shooting down parademons, escorting rocket ships and more. There is a decent variety here, though it is hard to beat most of the levels, so you won't see it all anytime soon. The second level in particular is pretty tricky, where you're protecting a spaceship from asteroids. You have to fly around smashing any that might hit the ship, but you can run out of eye lasers, so have to rely on your fists. But it does all control kinda well, and the game looks really good. Superman is fast and responsive, and your eye lasers can even run out on some of the levels, but not all of them thankfully. The most annoying thing about the game is the amount of loading that happens, and the fact that it takes ages to load. But the levels do last a good few minutes each, so you do end up playing more than it loads. This is definitely the best Superman game on the C64, so if you want one, make sure it's this one. As we all know, the only thing better than a Superman is a Super Gran, and she got her own game here on the C64. Now, many of you won't know, but Super Gran was an old kids show here in England, and it was glorious, literally about a granny with superpowers. The video game is actually alright as well. You play as Super Gran in a few different scenarios. The first one, you're flying your bike copter and have to shoot down other clones of you before they shoot you down. The next sees you in the streets avoiding enemies and collecting cats while refueling at petrol stations. The third is a driving level, and I'll be honest, I couldn't get past it. The graphics here are super basic with very little animation. In fact, it all looks a bit crap, but it's still playable. Each of the levels is against a timer and you just have to survive until it runs out. If you lose a life, the timer is reset. The controls are responsive and everything moves smoothly, so it's all perfectly doable, apart from the third level, which is just bloody impossible. Surprisingly, this game is kind of fun, and I would actually recommend giving it a go. And finally for today, here is X-Men Madness in Murder World, a very ambitious game that just isn't very good. Here you play as a whole load of X-Men and women. You've got Cyclops, Storm, Nightcrawler, Colossus, Dazzler and Wolverine, and amazingly you can swap between them at any time. The game plays similarly to the Captain America game that we looked at earlier, but definitely not anywhere as good. The game also has a load of adventure elements in there, and using the spacebar button you can select from all the confusing icons at the bottom of the screen in order to pick up items, use them, change character, and even use your mutant abilities. You'll be doing this a lot in between exploring Murder World and fighting enemies. The combat here though is just terrible, with some of the worst hit detection I've seen. Sadly, most of the combat can't be avoided as enemies drop items that you need. To attack, you hold the button and press a different direction for a different attack. Each character has their own abilities, and you'll need to use things like Nightcrawler to teleport into boxes to get what's inside, or you'll need to use Dazzler to light up dark areas and so on. This is a really cool idea, but most of the time it's so cryptic and more about trial and error than actually figuring something out. Graphically, the game looks really good when it's not moving, but the animation is awful and everything is super choppy. Also, the game has to constantly load when moving screen or changing characters. Admittedly, it does this pretty quickly, but it does all add up. This game really does have some excellent ideas, and if it was made for more powerful hardware, I reckon it might have actually been alright. But here, the combat is terrible, the annoying puzzle solving and choppy animation just make it not fun to play. Again, if you have the patience of a saint, you might be able to stomach it, but for me, I just didn't enjoy my time with this game. So there you go, a bunch of superhero games for the C64. I'm sure there's a load more out there, so please make sure to tell me that aren't here so I can include them if I ever do a part 2 of the subject. On screen now you can see where you can follow us, so why not do so? We've got loads of great content for everyone to enjoy. Now, all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.